hit record here. All right, y'all. Hopefully, we still have everybody and y'all are back with us. So let's do this. Just to make sure I still have everybody and y'all are still with me out there. Can you give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat if you are still with me? You can hear me. You're still following along out there. So just give me a thumbs up in the chat. Let me know that you are still with me. Hey, Sammy. Good morning. Welcome. Right. So again, just if you can give me a thumbs up in the chat so I know that you are still out there, still with me, and still following along. If I don't see one in the chat from you, I may bump you out just to kind of wake everybody up here. Okay. While you are doing that, ladies and gents, I'm going to throw up my kind of landing slide again. All right. To give everybody a kind of overview of what we're doing today so you can see. And again, I want to try to get back in the habit of putting these up at the beginning of every class. So we're going to kind of dive into the movie Fences, which is the film we're going to watch for our film study today. If you were here in class last week, at all, then you probably remember we watched the trailers for two different movies, and then you took a poll at the end, and so I used those results to determine which movie we were going to watch. So we're going to try and do that today, and talk about, like you can see here, how he uses he being August Wilson, the city of Pittsburgh, as a character. All right. But before we dive into that, what I want to do is pose this question to get our brains kind of thinking about this stuff for today. So what I would like you to think about is this question. If your life was made into a movie, do you think the city of Philadelphia would serve as a character in and of itself? Respond in the chat. So what I mean by this is if they were going to make your life into a movie, do you think that the city of Philly would almost be like its own character because of the impact that it has on your life, or just the impact that it has in on people in general? What do you think? All right. So take a minute or two here, respond in the chat for me. And again, if you want to come off mute and answer that way, because it's easier for you, that works fine too. But I'd like to see at least 2 responses in the chat here before we move on. So think about this and put it in there. And also, tell me why. If you think yes, tell me why. And if you think no, tell me why not. Again, put that in the chat for me, please. Thank you very much. All right, I'm gonna check the chat here. All right, we do have one. We do have one response in there so far. We got one in there again from Shirley. All right, Sammy says yes because that's where I come from. Right, just Sammy, you're saying yes. the city of Philly would be like its own character because that's where you're from. So you would want to represent that in a movie about your life. Am I understanding you correctly? All right, cool, cool. Sammy says, yeah, but Shirley says not at all. Maybe like New York. So, what do you mean by that, Shirley? Are you saying no? It wouldn't because it would. You would if you were gonna do that, it'd be more with like a city like New York. Is that what you mean? Okay. Can you explain that at all then? Like, what is the difference then, and why would you have like New York be like its own character if you were from there but not Philly? That's interesting. You're the first person so far this week that's said no to this question. And while you're typing that, Shirley, I'll put this up one more time. Naima and Nishan, if you guys have any thoughts, feel free to answer this in the chat as well. Right? If your life was made into a movie, do you think the city of Philly would serve as a character in and of itself? Meaning, if they made a movie about your life, do you think Philly itself would almost be like a character in the movie because of the impact it's had on your life, because of the personality the city has, because of its history, whatever it might be? What do you think? Yes or no? And if you think yes, tell me why. And if you think no, tell me why not. All right. So we'll come out of the screen share here for a minute. So can you think of anything to kind of explain what you mean, Shirley? Why you would rather do it with a city like New York and not Philly? Is it because people use New York in movies more? Oh, there we go. Yeah, in the chat here. New York is more fit for me. It's a lot more crazy and wild. In Philadelphia is too calm for me, especially for my character. I like that. Okay, so the city should kind of represent your personality, and you think New York would do that a little bit better. Is that right? Gotcha. Are you from Philly originally, Shirley, or are you from New York? Oh, from Puerto Rico. That's right. I'm sorry. Right, so that makes sense. So, and that's also interesting too, right, y'all? How we have, Sammy said yes right away, answered pretty quickly, and your dad was born in New York. Okay, so now that's kind of starting to make sense, right? Because we see, Sammy's born and raised in Philly, so he was like right away, yes, Philly would be a character, itself in a movie about my life. And Shirley was like, I don't know, because she also isn't, but she's also not born and raised in Philly. She was born in Puerto Rico. Her dad's from New York. So she kind of has these different experiences and realizing like, oh, Philly's where I live now, but it doesn't really capture my personality the way like New York would. So if my movie would maybe be set in New York, not Philly. All right. That's really good. Any other final thoughts on this? Well, good job, y'all. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing. And the reason that we started with that question today is because, like I said, as I get my screen share back going again here, we are going to be talking about August Wilson and Fences, since that is the film we are going to watch for this film study class. All right. Now, like I said, if you were here last week, then you should that name should sound familiar because we did a little bit of research on August Wilson. I sent you guys to this website and you told me, 5 important things you learned about him. But not all of us may have been here. So we're gonna do a little quick recap, and then we're gonna talk about him, and then we're gonna talk specifically about the film itself, or the play, excuse me. So let me do this. All right. So you can follow along with me here, and then I'll have maybe a question or two to recap this, and then we are going to jump into the movie itself. All right. So life and background of August Wilson. So he's born in Pittsburgh to a white father who never lived with his family and a black mother uh, from North Carolina, and he shared his life with his mother's and 5 siblings. So that's going to be something that we're going to talk about more later on as we see the kind of father-son dynamic uh, between Denzel Washington's character and his character's son in this movie, and think about, did August Wilson's experience of, not really having a father figure around, could that have influenced maybe the way that he wrote this relationship? That's something to keep in mind. Flunks out of ninth grade and starts working kind of menial, low-paying jobs at 16, and he received his education in libraries and town hubs, so coffee shops, etc. He becomes involved in the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s, and around that time, he also moves to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and begins to write, clearly using speech patterns and rhythms that were familiar to him from Black neighborhoods of Pittsburgh. His writing was also strongly influenced by the blues. So if any of you are fans of Langston Hughes, like I am, his poetry is very heavily influenced by like the kind of 1920s and 30s jazz scene in Harlem. August Wilson's is influenced by the blues scene around Pittsburgh in this time, right? And you can see, like it says in his writing, he's using those speech patterns and rhythms that are familiar to him because you write what you know. So we'll see that coming across, in his dialogue and his dialect and stuff like that. All right. He begins writing plays in Pittsburgh and then takes a job in St. Paul writing dramatic skits for the Science Museum of Minnesota. And then in 1968, he founds and directs the Black Horizon Theater Company in Pittsburgh in a predominantly Black neighborhood referred to as the Hill, which is where a lot of his plays are going to be set. And we'll actually see that literal hill in part of the movie that we watched today. So keep an eye out for that. Okay. Then in 1972, he begins writing his first play called Jitney, about a gypsy cab station, which was produced at the Black Horizon, and then again in 1982 at the National Playwright Conference. The play was then revived and presented at the 1997 National Black Theater Festival in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is where his mom was also from. So it's a nice kind of full circle thing there. All right. And then he begins to write that Pittsburgh cycle of plays. Now, some of you who were here last week that did that research, which I think might have just been Shirley, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong. This was something that I saw a lot of you kind of point out when you were giving your 5 facts, was this Pittsburgh cycle of plays, which is a series of 10 plays, 9 of which are set again in that Hill district in Pittsburgh, and each is set in a different decade, and they're all designed to represent the African American existence in the United States during the 20th century. So you can see we have the plays here, right? We have Gem of the Ocean set in the 1900s, Joe Turner's Come and Gone set in the 1910s, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. This is the only one that's not set in Pittsburgh. This one is set in Chicago in the 1920s. And if you remember, that was the other trailer that we watched. That was the other choice we had for a movie. That's the one with Chadwick Boseman in it. Right? The Piano Lesson was set in the 30s, 7 Guitars in the 40s, Fences, which is the one we're going to watch, that's set in the 50s. Two Trains Running is in the 1960s, Jitney's in the 70s, King Hedley II is in the 80s, and then Radio Golf is set in the 90s. Right, so is all these plays, and a lot of you pointed out when you were doing that research last week that he didn't initially intend to write this series of 10 plays. It just kind of happened and kind of came out of him creatively as he began to write. Okay. Two of those plays go on to win the Pulitzer Prize, right? Which again is the most prestigious, award you can earn as a playwright in the United States, right? Fences wins in 1985, and then the piano lesson wins, or excuse me, Fences wins in 1987, and the piano lesson wins in 1990, right? So think about that for a second. Here's a guy who drops out of school in ninth grade, doesn't really have a formal education studying theater or dramatic writing or anything like that. Then eventually goes on to write two Pulitzer Prize winning plays. Many people write drama for years and years and years and don't even get nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, right? And this dude won two. So it's a very good lesson of formal education, formal degree not defining you, and perseverance towards your dreams, you know what I mean, and towards your art, right, and your vision. Very, very cool, right? In 2005, he's diagnosed with liver cancer, and then he dies in October at Swedish Medical Center in Seattle. Okay, before we dip into Fences itself, I just want to pause for any questions there. And if you were following along, what I'd like to ask in the chat is, what is one thing so out of all that stuff I just quickly went over? Hey, Ashland, good morning. Thank you for joining us. What is one thing about August Wilson's life that stands out to you? And actually, I know you're just joining us, so we just kind of briefly went over via PowerPoint the life of August Wilson, the playwright who wrote the play Fences that the movie that we're going to watch is based off of. Right? Those of you who were here and were just following along with me, of all that stuff I just kind of went over, was there one thing in particular that stood out to you as interesting, or like, oh wow, or that you didn't know? I know I definitely have one in mind, but I want to hear from you guys first. Anything that stood out to you about his life or his works or his plays based on the stuff I just went over? Well, you guys are thinking about this or typing, I can share one that stood out to me, which was, and I kind of already mentioned this, but the fact that he, didn't really have a formal theater education. Didn't go to college to study dramatic writing or anything like that. Dropped out of school in ninth grade, but eventually went on to write, two Pulitzer Prize winning plays, which, like I said, is the highest, level you can kind of achieve in terms of, playwriting in the United States. So super impressive, I think, and really inspiring. And again, it shows that, you don't have to be defined by having a formal education or formal degree. If you have something, in your head, some kind of art that you want to get out, then, pursue that. And that's what he did. And now he's, widely regarded as one of the most important figures, not only in African American, drama, but in drama in general. So that's one thing that stood out to me. Anything stand out to anybody else that we went over there in that short kind of intro or background, I should say? No? All right. Well, if anything does come to mind, please feel free to share it in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. But let's jump back in here now. Oh, we do have one from Sammy, which is the fact that Denzel Washington acknowledged him. Yeah, so that's a really good point, Sammy. Is a lot of times we read about or see these kind of figures that we don't really know too much about, and so we can sometimes not realize their impact until we see somebody that we do know and recognize that we regard as like important actually kind of acknowledge them as like being an influence. So that's a good point. The fact that Denzel Washington not only acknowledges him, but he Denzel Washington stars in this movie we're going to watch and also directs it, and then he produced the other one with Chadwick Boseman and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. So this is clearly a guy that Denzel Washington looks up to and acknowledges as being very influential. And so it's kind of like that that stepping stone, right? Like, okay, well, I know Denzel Washington is legit, so if he says this guy is legit, that must mean this guy's pretty impressive, right? So that's a good point, Sammy. Thank you for that. All right. So then let's dig into the play itself. All right. So let me get this going again here. So Fences presents a slice of life, excuse me, in a black tenement in Pittsburgh, set in the late 50s through 1965. When they say slice of life, think about it like a pizza, right? So rather than eating the whole pie at once, you just eat a slice. So when we say slice of life, rather than depicting all the stuff, all the life that's going on in Pittsburgh at that time, we just take one slice, one family's experience. But that's meant to depict kind of, how the majority of experiences for African Americans in that section of Pittsburgh were at that time. Right? The main character, Troy Maxon, is a garbage collector who has taken great pride in keeping his family together and providing for them. Right? He is also, I should mention this, it's not on here, but Troy was also a great baseball player, right? But when the play begins, he's in maybe his 40s or 50s. So that means when he's playing baseball, it's in probably the 1920s, 1930s. So that's before World War II. That's before Jackie Robinson breaks the color barrier. So there's a lot of segregation that prevents him from playing baseball professionally. And we'll kind of see in the section of the film we watched today how that's affected his demeanor, his attitude towards everything, and stuff like that, right? Troy's rebellion and frustration sets the tone for the play as he struggles for fairness in a society which seems to offer none. In his struggle, he builds fences. He builds fences between himself and his family. So that's why the play is called Fences, because we'll see him physically, literally building fences, between him and his neighbors and all that stuff, but also figuratively putting up fences between himself and his family. And what would that mean? Do you guys think if you are? And I'll put this question in the chat too, but what does it mean to say you are putting up fences between you and someone else. All right. If I say I'm putting up fences between myself and my family, but I'm not actually building a fence, what am I doing then instead? What does that mean? So we have an idea of, where this play gets its name from. Yeah, you're right, Sammy. You're blocking them. Blocking them how? Because again, we said, we don't mean you're physically building a fence, and putting it up. So if you're not doing that, how are you blocking them? Right, exactly. Stop talking to them, ignore them, kind of cut them out. Maybe you block them from your phone. All right, that's what it might look like today. Let me lose your name. Okay. But yeah, so you're doing anything you can to, just like if you would have a literal fence built up that would prevent them from seeing you, talking to you, anything like that. You're doing that through your actions, right? So, like Sam, you said, you're ignoring them, you're blocking them. Maybe you stop talking to them. Maybe you unfollow them on Instagram, whatever it might be. But that's how you would kind of build that figurative fence. But like I said, in the play, we're going to see Troy do both. He's going to be building actual literal fences, but then we'll see how that also causes him to build fences between him and his family figuratively as well, right? Emotional fences, as it were. Good job, Sammy. Thank you. All right. So last quick bit here before we jump into the movie. All right. Troy also wrestles with the idea of death and claims that he sees death as nothing but a fastball. So there's that baseball metaphor again, right? Something he can handle. The baseball metaphor is used in relation to death throughout the play. Okay. So now we get a sense of kind of who Troy is, what the play is about, and the movie that we're going to watch, the screenplay. Like you'll see, there's a screenplay credit given to August Wilson because Denzel Washington uses largely the script, as it was written, for the stage play, and just kind of puts it into movie form. So what you're going to be hearing is pretty much exactly what you would hear if we would have gone to see this play in the 80s. All right, written by August Wilson. So what I want you to look out for here in this section that we're going to watch this morning is an answer to this question that I'm going to put in the chat right now. All right, I want you to list one, I should say, list at least one example of how Wilson uses the city of Pittsburgh as a character itself in the film. Okay. So just like we talked about at the beginning of class here, if there would be a movie about our lives, Philly would be a character, or in Shirley's case, maybe be New York because that suits her personality better. But keep that in mind, and I want you to pay attention to the details and see if you can find at least one example of how Wilson does that with Pittsburgh. So that means paying attention to the visual stuff we see, like the shots of the city, where they're going, what it looks like. Um, when they're talking about places in the city that they go to do certain things and how their lives revolve around that, if that might be the case. If parts of the city affect the story and what happens in the plot, all those things that kind of give the city almost a life and a personality of its own that affects the characters because it was such a big part of August Wilson's experience growing up. That's usually what tended to happen in his plays. So we're going to see if we can spot that in the film here. All right, ladies and gents. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to watch the movie that way. I'm going to try to keep the volume up as loud as I can because I know sometimes it does get a little lower when I share my screen, but I'm also going to have the captions on. So try to follow along as best you can. And then when this section is done, we're going to wrap up and I want to see if you can list any of those examples in the chat for me. Okay. And if you want to do them as we're watching here, if one pops out to you, feel free to do that as well. All right. So here we go. So notice, what do we already hear here that we know, like when we talked about that background of what Troy does for a living and kind of the city as a character, both visually and with sights and sounds and stuff. What does it already sound? What can we already hear? And I'll play it again real quick, just in case you missed it. Listen closely to what it sounds like is happening here. And you can tell me in the chat, but what do we already hear happening? It's definitely outside, Sammy, you're right. What else do you think is happening? So what does that sound like? It should be a familiar sound to most of us. Trucks, definitely, right? And if you remember, what did we say Troy's profession was when we were going over the background for the play? What does he do for a living? Does anyone recall? Maybe somebody else besides Sammy, since we've heard from him a lot. Shirley or Nishan. Anybody who can help me out? Ashley. Definitely, all right. Sammy says he doesn't remember, so who can help him out? Definitely outside, definitely trucks. Is it a specific kind of truck, do we think, based on the background we learned about Troy and what he does for a living in this play? Anybody else? Not construction, but you're close. Anybody else who can help Sammy out here? Shirley, maybe a thought? Ashley, do we remember? It's not construction. Think about what comes once a week, every week to the curb outside your house.
The trash man.
Yes, thank you, Shirley. So he's a trash collector, right? And so that's one of those ways, and Sammy, you got it too, thank you. And so again, that's one of those things that we can do in a movie that maybe we can't do in a play, right? Is, tell a story through not only what we see, but what we hear, right? And, we're appealing to all the senses at once, like what we hear, what we see, all right? Not all the senses at once, but more than just what we see on stage. So now we already know without even hearing dialogue or seeing a character that this is happening in the city, with the trash trucks going by. And again, another one of those examples of how we're using the city itself as a character, because now we already know it's kind of setting the tone there. All right. Now I will stop talking and we can watch this very, very good movie. Here we go. Also, sorry, just to clarify, remember this is set in the 1950s in a black neighborhood in Pittsburgh. So the language is going to reflect that because that's how August Wilson wrote it. Because that's what, like we learned in that background, that's what he knew. So just a precursor for everybody, so nobody is shocked. I doubt you would have been, but just wanted to be on the same page.
Joy, you ought to stop that. I ain't lying. The nigga had a watermelon this big. Come on. What watermelon, Mr. Red? I like to sell out. What watermelon, Mr. Red? And it sits here figuring like, what Mr. Red said? He ain't said nothing. He figured the nigga too dumb to know he's carrying a watermelon. He wasn't gonna get much sense out of him. Trying to hide that great big old watermelon under his coat. Afraid to let the white man see him carry it on. I'm like you, I ain't got no time for them kind of people. Now, what he look like getting mad because he see the man from the union talking to Mr. Rain. He come up to me talking about, well, Nelson gonna get us fired. I told him, get away from me with that. He walk away from me calling you a troublemaker. What Mr. Rain say? They ain't said nothing. He told me to go down to the commissioner's office next Friday. They call me down there to see them. Well, long as you got your complaint filed, they can't fire you. That's what one of them white fellas tell me. They worried about them firing me. What they gonna fire me because I asked a question? That's all I did. Went to Mr. Rand, I asked him why. Why you got all the white men driving the colored liquor? Told him what's the matter? Don't I count? Think only white fellas got sense enough to drive a truck? Hell, that ain't no paper job. Anybody can drive a truck. How come you got all the whites driving and colored liquor? He told me take it to the union. Well, hell, that's what I done. Now they want to come up with this pack of lies. I told Brownie if the man come and ask him any questions, just tell the truth. There ain't number something they done trumped up on you because you filed a complaint on. Brownie ain't got that much sense. Man, what thing about nothing. All I want them to do is change the job description, give everybody a chance to drive the truck. Hey! Brownie can't see that. He ain't got that much sense. I didn't think he'd be making out with that gal be up at Taylor's all the time, that Alberta gal. Who? Well, same as you and me, getting about as much as we is, which is to say nothing. It is, huh? Well, I figure you're doing a little better than me. And I ain't saying what I'm doing. Oh, take a look here. I know you. If you had got anywhere near that gal, 20 minutes later you'd be looking to tell somebody, and the first one you're going to want to tell that you going to want to brag to is going to be me. Oh, I ain't saying that. I see where you be eyeing. I eye all the women. I don't miss nothing. Don't never let nobody tell you Troy Maxson don't eye the women. You been doing more than I know. You done bought her a drink or two. Hell yeah, I bought her a drink. What that mean? I bought you one too. That mean because I buy her a drink. I'm just being polite. It's all right to buy her one drink. That's what you call being polite. But when you want to be buying two or three, that's what you call eyeing her. Look here. As long as you've known me, you ever known me to chase after women? Hell yeah. As long as I've known you, you forgetting I knew you win. I'm talking about since I've been married to Rose. Oh, not since you've been married to Rose. Now, that's the truth, though. I can say, all right then, case closed. I see you be walking.
Right. So again, pay attention to what we see visually, right? What everything kind of looks like, and because again, we're looking for examples of how he's using the city of Pittsburgh itself as kind of its own character here. So hopefully you were paying attention to the landscape as they were driving the trash truck. Now we're seeing them walking home here. We see all the cars, people playing in the street. So just keep all this stuff in mind.
Walking around Alberta's house.
supposed to be a tailor's and you be walking around there.
What you watching where I'm walking for? I don't be watching after you.
I seen you walking around there more than once.
Yeah, you laugh and see me walking anywhere. That don't mean nothing because you see me walking around there.
Where'd she come from anyway? She just kind of showed up one day.
Tallahassee. You can look at that and tell she one of them Florida guys. They got some big, healthy women down there. Growing right up out the ground. She got a little bit of Indian in her. You know, most of them niggas in Florida got some Indian in her.
Yeah, I don't know about that Indian part, but she damn sure big and healthy. Woman wears some big stockings. Got them big old legs and hips wide as a Mississippi River.
Legs don't mean nothing. You don't do nothing but push them out the way. With them hips, pushing the ride,
Joy, you ain't got no sense.
The truth. Like you riding on Goodyear.
What y'all out here getting into?
You worried about what we getting into for, woman? This is man talk.
Well, okay, what y'all talking about? Well, are you gonna stay for supper?
No, I thank you, Rose, but Lucille says she cooking up a pot of pig feet. Pig feet? Yeah, I'm going home with you. I might even stay tonight. You got some pig feet. You got something in there to top them pig feet, Rose?
I'm cooking up some chicken. I got some chicken and collard greens.
All right, well, you go on back in the house. Let me and Bono finish what we talking about. This is man talk. I got some talk for you later. And you know what kind of talk I mean, too. You go on in there and powder it up.
Joy, stop it.
Oh, woman, come here. Oh, look here, Bono. When I first met this woman, I got out that place, said, hitch up my pony, saddle up my mare. There's a woman out there for me somewhere. I looked at here, looked at there, saw Rose, and I latched on to her. I latched on to her, and I told her, I'm going to tell you the truth. I latched on to her and told her, baby, I don't want to marry. I just want to be your man. Rose told me, tell him what you told me, Rose.
I told him if he wasn't a mankind and move out the way so the mankind could find me.
That's what she told me. Nigga, you're in my way. You're blocking the view. Move out the way so I can find me a husband. I thought it over 2-3 days.
Well, no,
Come back.
2-3 days nothing. You was back the same night.
Come back, told her, okay, baby, but I'm going to buy me a banty rooster and put him out there in the backyard. And when he see a stranger come, he going to flap his wings and crow. Look here, Bono. I can watch that front door by myself. It was that back door I was worried about.
You not sure what that joint doing up and telling a lie.
Well, thing was, we first got married. Forget the rooster. We ain't had no yard.
I hear you tell it. Me and Lucille was staying down there on Logan Street. Had 2 rooms with the outhouse in the back. I ain't mind the outhouse none, but when that goddamn wind blow through there in the winter, that's what I'm talking about. To this day, I wonder why the hell I ever stayed down there for 6 long years. But see, I didn't know I could do no better. I thought only white folks had inside toilets and things.
A lot of folks don't think they can do no better than they doing now. Just something you gotta learn. A lot of folks still shop at Bella's.
And the wrong shopping at Bella, she got fresh food.
I ain't said nothing.
So again, keep in mind, let's pay attention to the dialogue here, because we're looking for examples of how we can use this city as a character. We've already seen, visually the kind of landscape and, what it looks like. And now listen to how they talk about, certain places they've lived or where they shop, and how it kind of informs, the way their characters' attitudes and, what they do, because that all is, kind of tied in together here. All right.
And nothing about if she got fresh food. I'm talking about what she charged. She charged 10 cents more than the A&P.
A&P ain't never done nothing for me. I spend my money where I'm treated right. I go down to Bella, say, I need a loaf of bread. I pay you Friday, she get it to me. Now, what sense that make when I got money to spend it somewhere else and ignore the person who done right by me? That ain't in the Bible.
We ain't talking about what's in the Bible. What sense it make to shop there when she overcharged?
Well, you do your shopping where you want to. I do my shopping where people been good
Oh,
to
I
me.
don't think it's right for her to overcharge. That's all
Look here, I got to be getting on. Lucille gonna be raising all kinds
Where
of
you
hell.
going, nigga? We ain't finished this pint. Come here, finish this pint.
Well, hell, I am if you ever turn the bottle loose.
The only thing I say about the A&P is I'm glad Corey got that job down there. Help with his school clothes and things. Gabe done moved out. Things getting tight around there. He got that job. He can start to look out for himself.
Corey DeNorton got recruited by a college football team.
I told that boy about that college football stuff. The white man ain't gonna let him get nowhere with that football. I told him when he first come to me with it. Now you come telling me he done got Mo tied up in it. He ought to get recruited and how to fix cars or some way he can make a living.
He ain't talking about making no living playing football. It's just something the boys in school do. They're going to send a recruiter by to talk to you. He'll tell you, he ain't talking about making no living playing football. It's an honor to be recruited.
It ain't gonna get him nowhere. Bono will tell you that.
If he be like you in the sports, he gonna be all right. Hey, but two men ever played baseball good as you. That's Babe Ruth and Josh Gibson. They're the only two men ever hit more home runs than you. And what did it ever get me? I ain't got a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out
Times
of.
have changed since you were playing baseball, Troy. That was before the war. Times have changed a lot since then.
How the hell it done changed?
They got a lot of colored boys playing ball now, baseball and football.
You right about that, Ro. Times have changed, Troy. You just come along too early. There ought not never have been no time called too early.
All right. So that's a good place to stop right there. And again, hopefully you were able to follow along. I know the screen share can make the volume a little tricky sometimes, but ladies and gents, what I want to do now is I'm going to put that question in the chat one more time. Make sure I'm sending it to everyone. All right. Okay. Can we think about one example we saw in that section of how Wilson, meaning August Wilson, who wrote the play and thus the screenplay, uses the city of Pittsburgh as a character itself in the film? Think about what you saw. Think about some of the stuff we talked about. And then I'd like you to list one example in that chat for me, all right? We got about 5 minutes left here, so I'd like to see these come through. All right, we'll talk about them real quick, and then we'll kind of wrap everything up. All right. One example of how the city itself was like another character in the play. What do you think? While you guys are doing that, I'm going to make sure I have my attendance together here. All right, what do we think? You start to see some of these coming in the chat. You can also come off mute and answer verbally if that's a little easier. But was there one example, at least one example in there that we saw of how the city itself was kind of like a character? What do we think? Again, think about some of the stuff we saw visually, like some of the shots of the city. Think about when they were kind of walking home, we saw what the kids were doing in the street. Think about when they were talking about where they lived, or where, which grocery store they shop at. All that stuff should kind of tip you off here. I'd like to see at least one of these in the chat before we end today. So can anybody help me out here with this? Sammy says, he said a block name and they were all in the yard talking kids outside. Yeah, really good job, Sammy. So when they're talking about where they lived, he said, we used to live down there on Henderson, I think, or I forget the exact name of the street. And Bono is, kind of reiterating the fact that, I didn't know we could live anywhere else because I just thought that's where, black people lived and white people are the ones that had inside toilets and things like that. And then we saw the kids playing in the street when they were walking home. Do you think that's something August Wilson probably saw a lot growing up in Pittsburgh and that's why he put it into the play? Or was that just a random, like, oh, I think this would be cool if there were kids playing stickball there? What do you think? Do you think that was just kind of like random by accident, or he meant to put those kids playing stickball in there because that's what he was used to? What do you think? You think about what goes on outside, where you live, on the street or on the corner or wherever. If you were writing a play and you were setting it in Philly or around your house, would you include that stuff? So that might tip you off as to why he might have put it in there, or if he put it in there on purpose, I should say. So what do you think? Do you think that was, he did that on purpose, or was just kind of like an extra thing they put in the movie? What do you think? Any final thoughts on this? Shirley, Ashlyn, Nay? Question was, when we saw, like you mentioned all those kids playing stickball on the street, Sammy. And so my question is, do you think that's something that August Wilson put in there on purpose because he probably saw a lot of that growing up in Pittsburgh, or was it just kind of like a random thing they put in the movie just to have there? And again, this doesn't have to be just Sammy. If anybody else has a thought on this, you can share in the chat or come off mute. Like I said, Shirley, Ashlyn, Nay, Nashawn, anything. Shirley said it's probably very popular to see back then. Yeah, I think you're right, Shirley. I think, because remember, this is set in the 50s, and it's set in the same kind of neighborhood in Pittsburgh where August Wilson grew up. So he probably saw a lot of that growing up at that time, in Pittsburgh. So that's why he puts it as kind of some of the background when Troy and Bono are walking home. So again, those are two examples right off the bat of how we can have, the setting, the city itself almost kind of take on its own personality and have, be its own character. And even when they're talking about which grocery store to shop at, and Troy's saying, I only shop at this one because she hooks me up, and if I can't pay right away, she lets me pay on Friday rather than going to the AMP where stuff is 10 cents cheaper, but they don't take care of me, because he knows that person personally, and it's kind of the neighborhood working together. And so that in turn, furthers Troy's whole belief system of, like, you should always do right by people and things like that. Right. So keep this in mind as we watch the rest of the movie. All right. How does the city of Pittsburgh kind of itself act like a character? And does it maybe cause Troy to put up some of those both physical and figurative offenses that we talked about earlier? All right. Really good job, y'all. So don't forget that we are not going to see each other on Friday because you guys don't have class. All right. But I will make sure I email everybody and put on the Summit announcement page what I would like you to do over the weekend, which is just going to be checkpoint 1 on Summit, which I still have to edit and assign to everybody. Okay. So be on the lookout for that in your Yes Philly email. And if you have questions about anything, you can come see me in the Summit Lab from 1 to 3 or shoot me a message. Okay. Thank you very much. I will see you guys all on next Tuesday, since again we're off on Friday, and stay safe until then. Have a good weekend. All right. Really good job. And thank you guys all for logging on and being here today.